All right, let me close out some of these tabs so I feel less...
You feel a little suffocated by those tabs?
A little suffocated by
if you could only see how many I have up right now, man.
Welcome to A Century in Cinema. I'm Arthur.
And I'm Andrew.
And this is a podcast where we discuss a classic film from every year, starting in 1920. And today's film is from 1929. George Wilhelm Pabst's Pandora's Box from Germany. We are finished with the 1920s. The Roaring Twenties are over. We should do a wrap-up at the end of this episode of like what our favorite films were from the 1920s that we watched, others that we missed that we wish we had seen, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right, moving into our little mini history lesson. Everyone knows 1929. It's the beginning of the Great Depression. Throughout the year of 29, there's signs and signals that the economy is not as strong as the stock market would have you believe. And on October 28th, everything kind of falls apart and there's a massive sell-off. Now, why the Great Depression happened, the root causes of it, as I looked into this, I was trying to find some sort of explain like I'm five or explain to me like I'm a filmmaker sort of summary of why everything kind of collapsed. And it's pretty hard to actually get a cause for the Great Depression. It's this, there's a lot of macroeconomic theory that goes back and forth. And there are people who, smart economists who debate about what really caused it. But I'll try to summarize and take everything I say with a grain of salt. Throughout the 1920s, the American economy basically was overvalued and the bubble burst. As one system fails, other systems start to fail like a domino effect. As soon as all these loans have to be called in, there's a mad rush on the banks, and then the banks don't have any money. And then when the banks don't have any money, all the industries have nowhere to go to actually like get cash. So everyone has to really hunker down, and then you can't hire people, and then people don't have jobs, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Are you a fan of The Big Short by Adam McKay?
Yeah.
I really like that film. You were mentioning how you wish there was someone explain this to me like I'm a 5-year-old or explain this to me like I'm a filmmaker. I think that film does a great job. So many people hate it because they think it's like talking down to them. But I never felt like it was talking down to me. I really did feel like it was just breaking things down so that like any age group, or I guess more like any educational level, could watch that film and understand what went down.
Yeah. So I appreciate stuff like that for sure. And even now, I've seen The Big Short. I couldn't explain to you exactly what caused the economic collapse in 2008. I will, yeah. So I'll just admit that I don't exactly know how these kinds of things work, other than just saying something vague like the bubble popped.
Yeah. There were some basic concepts that I pretty much grasped just from watching that movie a few times that now I feel like pretty confident in talking about certain aspects of it. But yeah, I definitely couldn't give you all the information that movie had to give. There was a lot of it. Mm-hmm. I mean, is there a film that's kind of like that from this time period or about the Great Depression?
I don't think so.
We just have like Grapes of Wrath, just the people suffering in the wake of it.
Not that I know of, but if there was one, I'd be really interested to see it. Important to film, I always remember that the Great Depression was sort of seen as a boon for Hollywood because during the economic downturn, movies sort of became a way for the population to have some sort of therapeutic outlet for their troubles. Film was a cheap pastime. It was a way to escape from the general depression. And we should mention that 1929 is when the first Academy Awards were held. They were presented on May 16th, a little bit later in the year than they are now. And they were hosted by our favorite actor, Douglas Fairbanks.
There were two quote-unquote best pictures at the first Academy Awards. One was for Outstanding Picture, and one was for Unique and Artistic Picture. Wings won Outstanding, but Sunrise, Song of Two Humans, won Unique and Artistic. It's a very, very good film. Man is cheating on his wife. Him and the woman he's cheating on her with plot to kill her. he takes her out for one last day. Actually, it's considered like the beginning of naturalism within acting and stories, and like trying to really create an aesthetic that feels, like something more naturalistic, not as staged. But I would argue that the von Sternberg film, I don't know if you've watched this one yet, Docs of New York.
No.
I would argue that that film is actually the starting point. I feel like Sunrise would not exist if it weren't for that film.
So that's a little bit about the first Academy Awards. Our film this week, Pandora's Box, doesn't really encompass the sort of tone that I might expect from the start of the Great Depression. Something like The Crowd that we watched last week might actually be a better film to encapsulate that.
But I mean, the third act of this film, I mean, they do like fall into complete destitution. But yeah, let's get into Pandora's Box.
Pandora's Box is available to watch on streaming through the Criterion channel. That's where I recommend you watch it. It's also available on HBO Max, but the transfer there has a strange aliasing problem, at least as of October 2020. It's also a public domain film. You can find it on YouTube and various other internet archival sites.
According to InStyle magazine, Louise Brooks in this film was one of the 10 haircuts that changed the world.
Oh, totally.
I mean, she's gorgeous. She's just beautiful in this.
Should we just talk about Louise Brooks for about an hour and call it a day?
She worked with Pabst one more time in Diary of a Lost Girl, which was considered equally controversial to Pandora's Box.
You can tell that this film is based on a play. A lot of the scenes are set just in rooms between a small group of people talking to each other. And the film itself is divided into acts, and there are intertitles to tell you when we're moving into another act. The original play is from 1904. It's written by a German playwright named Frank Wedekind. And I'm sure I'm pronouncing that totally wrong.
For sure.
So there's a lot of dramatic turns and characters in this film. Do you think you can summarize the plot?
Our main character, Lulu, she is considered a vexen to men, kind of a dangerous thing because she's so beautiful. A newspaper editor falls in love with her at the same time as his son. She ends up throwing a tantrum and forces him to leave the woman he's planning on marrying, the editor, because she walks in on them and thinks they're sleeping together. The night that he marries her, he finds her with her father. He assumes that she is sleeping with him on the night of their wedding. She is not. So he tries to force her to kill herself. She turns around the gun and kills him. She goes to trial. She gets sentenced to 5.5 years in prison, escapes, finds the son of the editor who is also in love with her, and the two of them attempt to make a life for themselves. They are forced to resort to gambling. They lose everything, and she is forced to sell her body. Unfortunately for Lulu, she is selling her body in the district that Jack the Ripper just so happens to habitate. He finds her. He has a moment of clarity when he sees her. He thinks that there could possibly be a change for him, and he throws his knife behind him. And then right as she starts to seduce him, the powers that she possesses unfortunately take over him as well. And he sees a different knife behind her, kills her. The son that she was in love with, unaware that she has been murdered, decides that he can't be with her because she's a prostitute selling herself. So he leaves her and vanishes into a crowd of people. It's a very, very sad film.
And I will admit, this was one of those films that I thought really benefited from reading the Wikipedia entry before. It's based on a play, but there's not that many intertitles in this. A lot of the interactions are shown through close-ups, people looking at each other and exchanging glances and stuff like that. And, well, the whole story feels like a spider web of interactions with people. As a sort of theater piece, there's just a lot of relationships that are assumed and come up, and I don't know. You might benefit from looking up the plot beforehand or alongside of watching the film. I'll say that.
I want to get something out of the way here really quick.
Yeah.
Do you think Pandora's Box, the title, is an innuendo?
I was thinking about that. I don't know.
I mean, it does feel like regardless of if it is a reference to genitalia or not, the Pandora's box of this situation is this woman and her sexuality. Whoever she comes in contact with meets complete ruin. In my opinion, this interpretation of the myth of Pandora's box always frustrates me a little bit. This is sort of a side note, but Pandora's box within culture, within conversation, has sort of like become this euphemism for chaos, destruction, things going wrong. When you hear someone saying it's Pandora's box, it means like someone has unleashed like hell upon the world. And while that is true, the last thing left in the box was hope. And that there was a glimmer of hope regardless of the chaos that ensues. I always read that as the actual point of the whole myth, was that even when all these rules are broken and things completely erupt into chaos, hope remains. And I'm sure someone who's like an expert on this myth is just gonna tell me it's completely wrong. That's always how I've interpreted it. And this film / play definitely fall privy to that, because there is not a glimpse of hope in this entire story. And I truly was thinking, like, around halfway through, I realized, okay, there isn't going to be a Pandora. Pandora's box is her. Whether it is referencing her box or not is up to the viewer's interpretation, I guess. I wonder if that was even used as slang.
I have desperately been trying to figure that out as you've been speaking.
But regardless, her and her sexuality are definitely the Pandora's box of this thing. And so I kept thinking, okay, this is going to end with a glimmer of hope. And I didn't even necessarily want it to end with a glimmer of hope. I'd like to make that clear as well, because we're going to be talking about the alternate ending at some point, and I disagree with that as well.
One of the reasons that I chose it for our list to watch was I understood this film to sort of be an early feminist film. Did you feel that way when you were watching it?
I do think that it displays the inequality between men and women. She doesn't seem to have much agency or much power in any situation outside of using her sexuality. And in the end, that literally gets her killed. It does feel kind of like an examination on the unfairness of the gender roles at this point in society.
So do you feel like Lulu in this story is the victim versus the villain?
If those are my two options, I'm definitely going to choose victim. I guess she literally is a victim of murder at the end. She's a victim of very, very poor circumstances as well. Is forced into complete destitution by the man she's with losing all of his money. And if she had just gone lesbian with the Countess, then I feel like things would have ended up a lot better for her. Alice Roberts gives a very phenomenal performance in this film as N. It's weird because it still like kind of is an implication, but it feels like so much more than an implication that she's gay.
Yeah, that's definitely the other reason that I was interested in this film, is because I had heard there was a lesbian relationship. I mean, I shouldn't have been really surprised, but it's a little bit more under the surface than I expected. The character of the Countess is still trying to repress her feelings, I would say.
I was shocked by this. I mean, this film still feels very controversial. There's almost more sexuality in this than a film that would have full-on sex scenes, because so much of it is implied.
So I've heard that there's, a lot of people who really resist this film, call it out as being misogynist. I think the original play has been called more of a misogynist piece.
I'm not going to say whether this film is misogynistic or feminist myself, truly. Mainly because that's always a difficult lens for me to watch film with, and that's probably a fault of my own.
Yeah, I feel that way too.
Like, I definitely am watching films for gender roles and how they're portrayed, but you can watch something, I mean, seriously, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer really is one of my favorite TV shows as far as like how it portrays women. Just the entire story, I think, is told so well. And the creator of it, Joss Whedon, I mean, his relationship with the actress who plays one of my favorite characters, her name is Charisma Carpenter, the way he treated her on set, the way he sexualized her, and the way he ended up writing off her character because she got married and pregnant And her opinion on that and like the conversations they've had that she's talked about make me know that he doesn't necessarily stand for all the things that show stands for. It's not because I'm scared of calling something misogynistic or feminist. It's because I can interpret a piece as misogynistic or feminist, but it's one of the few points of a film where I really feel like the intention behind it is equally as important as the interpretation. And I don't always know the intention going into it. But within the film, I do think gender roles are made very equal. And I think that the whole thing is about a woman who is trying to gain power and the world keeps pushing against her. And I can see a lot of women, even today, watching a film like this and really being able to relate to it. And I think that that's just as important.
Yeah, I think that, even just a story being told from the perspective of a mistress like this who is being thrown around and with all these expectations being put on her from the men in her life, just telling a story from that perspective is probably pretty progressive for this time period. And it feels like this could be like some over-the-top morality piece telling its audience, if you act like this, then bad things will happen to you. But when you watch the film, none of it feels that way. Lulu's character feels completely natural and innocent, and there is something that feels like she is just a victim. She is just someone who can't help what's happening to her despite her best efforts. That the universe really isn't fair to someone like her in this position.
And I don't know if I would call her innocent. I mean, especially with the scene where she's at the performance and she lures the man in knowing full well he's about to be married. She wants to be able to have that status.
Yeah, that like mischievous grin she has on her face when the fiance finds them in that closet is not innocent. You're right.
Yeah. I really, really liked this film. I do want to make that clear, too. I thought this was a great way to round out the silent films we've been watching. I'd never seen this before, and it gave me a lot to think about. So,
yeah, for sure. And even though it doesn't have the same sort of cinematic presence that we've watched from some of our more recent films like The Crowd and Metropolis, this feels a little bit more low-key. It does feel like something that's meant to be seen on a stage in the theater. I still really, really enjoyed it, and I wasn't sure if I was going to. I don't know if I just have something against long silent films, but they can still be a little hard to get through. But it's a little over 2 hours, and it's a lot of, simple setups. But seriously, the characters and the actors are all so good at what they're doing that it does make the story go by, and I enjoyed all of it. I mean, especially Louise Brooks. She just has this magnetic personality on screen. And even though I say that this belongs on a stage, even though it's adapted from a theater piece, the fact that cinema allows us to have close-ups of an actress like Brooks is pretty astounding because she has such a presence. She has such a attitude that you just can't help but watch.
And you did mention earlier that a lot of this film's communication is done through gestures and glances. Seriously, if you were on a stage in front of like a humongous like 3-tiered balcony auditorium, you could not get away with something like that. People in the back seats would not be able to know what was going on.
Right.
And so I really liked that way of adapting it. And it also folded in to all of the sexuality being more or less implied. It feels like it really is happening and like you're witnessing it because the whole film is being told with sort of this veil over it, fundamental plot points and basic communication between actors. You just sort of get lost in the world of this movie. So when it does go fully sexual, it still feels so scandalous and it still feels so real because that's how you've been interpreting the whole film up to this point. I really, really liked it.
I don't remember it ever going like fully sexual. What are you referring to?
And I guess that's what I mean. It doesn't really ever go fully sexual, but like when the film does its way of going fully sexual, her and the guy, tossing around backstage, her dancing with the countess, all of those moments, feel like way more sexual than they probably would have in a different film.
Okay. Yeah, and I completely see that. The most we see is just two people kissing, her and the editor's son. Right?
Yes, I do believe that's true.
I also wanted to say that kissing in the 1920s seems so violent. Faces...
They just, smash their faces together.
Yeah, faces just being But some of the films that we've watched, yeah, the kissing is always off.
No, doesn't she kiss Jack the Ripper? I really did think that that was going to be the hope at the end, was that literally our main character was going to convert Jack the Ripper. And I was like, oh my God, because he fully throws his knife away and stuff. And I was like, wow.
How crazy is it that Jack the Ripper just shows up at the end of this film? In the original play, there's a hint at the beginning. At least there's something. But in the film, he just kind of materializes out of the London fog and then finds Lulu randomly. It seems like such a weird...
And it is all in that same act, but we do get that one little shot of it being murderer on the loose.
Oh, yeah. No, it's all within the last 30, 20 minutes of the film.
Yeah.
By the way, that sign that says that there's a murderer on the loose is written in German, and assuming it is in London. I just thought that was a funny little moment.
I hadn't even thought about that.
When do you think this film takes place?
Well, let's see. It's about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, when Jack the Ripper shows up at the end, I was like, oh, we're actually in late 1800s.
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper time. But we're following this flapper girl who's clearly a product of the 1920s.
Her style is a product of the 1920s, but I think her character... Kind of one of the reasons she's considered so seductive is because she does seem to look different. She doesn't seem to be a part of any particular style. We get to see a nightclub, and it's not like there's a bunch of flappers everywhere.
Well, I guess so. I just did think, again, the Jack the Ripper thing, he just does seem to come out of nowhere. He seems like this mythological monster that sort of emerges. He even comes out of the fog. It was a strange moment, a strange way to end the film, even though that is how the play also goes. But in 1904, maybe it made a little more sense.
I mean, we don't know when he died.
He's still out there, guys. Be careful.
There is an alternate cut of this film, which, to my knowledge, does not even exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find it anywhere anyways.
Yeah, with a happy ending, yeah.
But you imagine her being announced innocent at trial and then joining the Salvation Army. And, from what we've seen... Within a year, the Salvation Army would just be completely obliterated. It wouldn't take any time at all. That
would just destroy them.
I'm obsessed with this cut because reading she's not found guilty at her trial, you just cut an hour and a half off this movie.
Cut the whole last half off.
I don't understand where the movie could go from there. Yeah, like I said, I have not been able to find this cut anywhere. I don't believe it exists, and maybe that's for the best. But
this is as good a time as any to bring up the review from the time period. This is coming from the Film Daily, which looks like it's just a little newspaper or magazine, not as big as Variety at the time, but this is an American review. And they mention that the cut that they watched of Pandora's Box is 1 hour and 6 minutes, 66 minutes. That's it. They say it's a hodgepodge. That was hacked by the censors when it was brought into the States.
At 1 hour and 6 minutes, that is the middle of the trial. So a bunch of stuff would have had to have been cut in the beginning, too, to even get to this point and then show an additional scene of her joining the Salvation Army. So even more was cut from that opening hour. People love to say that the French are super open sexually and have been for a while. But in the French cut of the film... there were changes made to where it was made clear that her and the Countess were just really close childhood friends. So there's that.
So this film was chopped up for its international releases. The only place the full version was shown, I believe, was in Germany.
And reviews in Germany at the time called this a bastardization of the play.
That's right.
So people weren't even into it.
And you read the original description of the play, I thought maybe people had been angry that there was this lesbian subplot put in, or one thing or another. The lesbian subplot in the play actually seems to feature more prominently than it does here. I was a little surprised.
It's so funny to me that this movie is kind of known for its lesbian subplot, considering I think it's a very, very minuscule part of the movie.
I think people are just surprised by its inclusion at all.
I was surprised. I will say that I was very surprised by the inclusion.
Oh, it's worth noting that the German critics really didn't like this film because Louise Brooks was playing the star and she was an American star. They really didn't take well to that.
The actor who plays the son also like refused to get along with her on set and saw like her casting as a disgrace. And I mean, that's just horrible and unprofessional. Reading about like an actor who like as soon as the cameras were off would like berate her and, you know, mock her talent, like saying that she wasn't an actor for the screen and wasn't an actor for anything and stuff like that. Like, I have worked as an actor with other actors who had no idea what they were doing, could not get lines down, did not ever find a character, and I just, you know, like, I still got along with them, I still became friends with them, and I still supported them because, like, that's just what you do when you're in a space like that and you have to be so vulnerable and perform.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you kind of have to be really supportive of your other performers. I think it's a miracle that her performance is so good and, like, so forward-thinking. I mean, you know, nowadays people watch this performance and they think, oh, wow, this is, like, where acting was headed. But I can understand how at the time people would not be able to see that.
Yeah, and it sounds like Paps was actually exploiting a lot of the tension on set at times.
Yeah.
Certainly for the Countess and Lulu, he was exploiting... Well, Paps was exploiting the fact that the actress playing the Countess didn't want her character to be a lesbian, so it actually comes across as her repressing her feelings, and you can feel that in the film. It comes through. There's all sorts of ways that this film sort of leans into a lot of method acting that, like you said, would sort of become the way that acting moves going forward. One thing that stuck out to me when I was listening to some of the Criterion extras was that Paps had Brooks choose her own outfit for the end of the film, this dress that she's in, and instead of it being a costume, it's her own clothing. And then the costume department ruins it, and they just smear a bunch of dirt on it, and it becomes this extra layer of personal attachment that she has, that her own outfit in real life has sort of been tarnished. Along with that, Paps purposefully picked someone to play Jack the Ripper because he knew that that was Brooks' type. She liked that kind of guy. And, I mean, when you look at the guy playing Jack the Ripper, he looks kind of like John Hamm, kind of like a Don Draper, so really... he's just a good-looking guy. But there's an extra layer of real eroticism there. And it doesn't seem like that bothered her, looking back on it. Her relationship with Paps seemed to be a positive one, and she really respected him. She really liked that he would alter his personality and alter his approach based on who was on set. She really responded to the fact that he seemed to be able to change his approach for each person that he was working with. Compared to other directors she had worked with, she said that was a quality that she really admired.
Yeah, and I guess they had a fling as well.
Oh, okay. Cool. She apparently also had a fling with Charlie Chaplin.
I mean, how many people even get to say that?
She burned a lot of her bridges in Hollywood, apparently. That's why she started making films in Germany. Before this, she was working as a contract actor under Paramount, but left that arrangement.
It looks like Paps really didn't want her to leave Germany and pretty much told her that the way that she was handling her career would make her end up just like Lulu. That's something to tell your actress. See what I'm saying? Like, Paps sounds like another white dude director from the 1920s. And, like, look, the art is great. I mean, Joseph von Sternberg is one of my favorite directors. But, like, there still is a huge culture in the film industry when it comes to gender roles and the way men treat actresses specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So all of your faves from back then, it's honestly safer to assume that they have most likely manipulated and emotionally tortured their actresses because that was, like, considered the way to get what you wanted. Horrible. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying I would say that to anybody who wants to outright call Pandora's Box a feminist film. I don't know. I just don't think that's the right way to, like, gauge or label films. I mean, I don't know. I don't know why I decided to get back onto that topic. even just hearing all of that about like how he's exploiting these actresses' fears, which were legitimate. I mean, you think of I can't even remember her name. You think of the woman who played Lena Lamont in Singing in the Rain, but her as that like evil foil actress with the horrible nasally voice is so hysterical and iconic, and everyone remembers her when they leave the movie. But she was not cast for years because people thought that was her real talking voice, and because people thought she really acted like that. So, you know, I can understand how Alice Roberts was like, well, I don't want to play a lesbian because everyone's going to think that I'm gay and nobody's going to cast me anymore. There's no way to tell what exactly went down. I mean, I'm sure there is a book or something, but she did only do a few more films after this one and then never worked again. So it's, I don't know, to like convince yourself that your actress's insecurities and fears on set aren't legitimate and then exploit them for the purpose of making your film. I don't know if I can call that feminism. So that's that.
Louise Brooks, in her own autobiography, kept referring to herself as Lulu. Like, she really came to relate to this role, and even its tragedy sort of started to define her life. Like, she didn't work beyond the 1930s. And I think that's also a symptom of Hollywood's sort of obsession with young, beautiful women, and then they get cast aside after just a short period of time in a way that men just are not. She repeatedly said that she was not, quote unquote, acting in this film. Like, she feels like the kind of actor who just plays herself. And that's an alluring thing for sure. Like, when it works really well.
Yeah, I love Julia Roberts. I do.
I love Ryan Gosling.
Yeah, I definitely think that if you have that face for movies, and if you have like that presence, and then you can find characters that you can fit that persona into, I say go for it. We're not, we could get into it, but like Stanislavski method acting, that stuff really does irk me, if I'm being completely honest.
Oh, yeah?
This entire idea of being unable to understand an emotion or being unable to portray a feeling or an experience without feeling it yourself and experiencing it yourself firsthand. I just think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of acting. And I do want to say, too, I mean, I've read books on Stanislavski method. I went to acting school for a very long time. I am fully aware, anyone who's listening to this, I am fully aware that that is more or less a very rough translation of what he was trying to achieve and sort of an unfair take on method acting. But at the same time, that is the way it has been interpreted today in today's standards for method acting. We don't have to get into all that right now because we'll probably have a better shot at it when someone who actually is method acting comes up.
That's fair.
Because yeah, like Louise Brooks, it does feel very natural. Her presence, it just wafts right off the screen. It's just so lovely.
You can see why she becomes this sort of sex symbol later on in the century. Even if her career doesn't, take off here, she becomes this person that people look up to and really idolize later on as this sort of symbol of the jazz era. I mean, with that bob cut and her outfits and, I mean, just her body shape, like, it looks like, when you think flapper girl, you think of Louise Brooks. You just do.
It's true. 100% true.
And I didn't even know I was thinking that until I saw this film.
Yeah, I thought this film was beautiful stylistically. I found it very engaging, but I truly do think one of the reasons it was so entertaining and so fast-paced for me was that just watching her was entertaining.
Mm-hmm. This movie would not be the same without her.
It feels like you're witnessing someone blossoming into a star, truly.
All right, I want to end the episode by talking a little bit about the 1920s in film. We've gone through a decade now, and I'm curious, Andrew, what was your favorite film that we watched?
Well, that is a mildly unfair question because we watched a film that is in my, I would say, top 50 of all time, which is Metropolis. So we're going to bar Metropolis because I would rather give a shout out to A Page of Madness. That film really, really spoke to me. I found it engaging. I I thought it was unlike anything I'd ever seen, not just from the 1920s, but of all time. I found it extremely engaging. I thought the entire approach to it was so riveting, and I'm a huge fan of Japanese film, and I love the way they view film as an artistic medium, and to see something so early from that country pushing the boundary so far into what film could do was breathtaking. So that was my personal favorite. And I'd also like to give just one last shout out to Within Our Gates. Definitely I would say one of the more important films we watched. I was so happy to get to watch a film like that. The only other early cinema I've seen revolving around Black people are the early Paul Robeson films. And he actually worked with Oscar Micheaux in an earlier film as well. So to get to make that connection was really nice. But yeah, I got to learn a lot about the history of Black filmmakers in the United States just through doing research on that film that I was previously unaware of. And I think, honestly, most people are. So that was great as well.
One more question. Throughout the entire decade, now that we've gone through kind of chronologically, is there any sort of theme or arc that you can express about the decade? Or does it feel kind of random?
It felt like every single one of these films was trying to push the medium of film into something that it might not have been quite capable of yet. Within Our Gates is trying to make a case for social justice and try and create empathy from an audience that might not have been ready at that time, which is the audience's fault, but still definitely the case. Phantom Carriage, it pushed forward special effects. Nowadays, special effects definitely have a lot to owe to it. Nanook of the North was trying to push the idea of documentary. Safety Last, being one of the earliest comedy full-length features, trying to push forward that comedies could be taken in larger chunks than shorts. Thief of Baghdad was trying to push forward Douglas Fairbanks as a sexy man, and it also was really pushing forward special effects and practicals. Battleship Potemkin, Page of Madness, as I've already stated, Metropolis, The Crowd, Pandora's Box, they all feel like they are sort of trying to push forward and trying to progress. None of these felt like super safe movies. Funny enough, I thought the safest film in that lineup was Safety Last, as far as the ambitions it sets and what it expects from its audience. But even that film, with the way it puts Harold Lloyd in mortal danger throughout most of it for laughs, that was the theme that I caught on to, was attempting to progress using film as a medium.
And piggybacking off of that, a lot of these films were chosen because they were pioneering something. As I looked into these films, there were always other examples of films that came before them that were doing the same thing, but technically they were first. I guess that's something that surprised me. It feels like there's always some other example that you can point to and be like, oh, actually, this other person did it before Nanook of the North. There was another documentary. Or before Thief of Baghdad, yeah, someone else had done sets that were just as extravagant. So even though these films sort of embody these pioneering elements in the early story of film, it felt like there was always someone else doing it before them. It's very hard to find and study the very first example of something being done. I guess that's something that I caught on to.
You didn't ever say what your favorite film from this was.
I think my favorite film from this era was Battleship Potemkin.
Nice.
All these films have their strengths and weaknesses, but I felt like Battleship Potemkin was the one that really struck me in a way that shocked me. I just loved the way that it used cinematic language in order to elicit so much emotion. Like, it's masterfully done. I really liked Battleship Potemkin.
Mm-hmm. Definitely had a strong emotional core to it, and it was like super visceral too. I'll go ahead and drop that my least favorite, although I think I've made it a little clear in other episodes. But I don't know what Arthur's keeping in. So, for all I know, he's cut out every single one of these comments at this point. But my least favorite definitely was easily The Thief of Baghdad. I found its depictions of race to be pretty offensive, and even outside of that, It was the only one that I felt bored during, even though I love Anna May Wong. I feel like she was done dirty in that movie anyways, so I didn't feel necessarily guilty about that.
And I'll get this out of the way too. My least favorite film was probably... you're going to hate me.
It's okay, say it.
It's between The Thief of Baghdad and A Page of Madness.
I knew it. I had a feeling, seriously. No. I mean, I remember our discussion quite vividly. I remember looking at my audio info after it was over and saying just like a huge block of nothing but me talking. And I was like, oh, all I remember Arthur really saying was that this wasn't the kind of movie that was for him. And then I just sort of went on my tirade for an hour.
I mean, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to talk to you about it, though, because even though it wasn't the kind of movie that I would normally like, I do feel like I discovered a real appreciation for it because of our discussion. So I'm really glad that I had that opportunity, besides, just like watching it and then being done with it.
Well, that's nice.
I would recommend A Page of Madness to a large number of people, but it just wasn't for me. I can't say the same thing about The Thief of Baghdad, which I think we have the exact same problems with. And even though there are sequences that I enjoyed, and for the most part, I really liked Douglas Fairbanks throughout it, it's an incredibly problematic film. And then as an overall sort of theme or lesson that I gleaned from going through these 1920s films, I discovered a passion for silent film that I didn't have before. It was always just something that I remember doing in film school years and years ago. But yeah, going through and watching a number of these classics on my own and chronologically has helped me to really appreciate the art form and the genre. Yeah, because it's kind of its own genre for what it is. I really enjoyed all of these films, and I've sought out, let's see now, one of Ozu's early films, I Was Born But, which was from the early 1930s. And then off of your suggestion, I watched 2 Joseph von Sternberg films, Underworld and The Last Command, which were both just fantastic. They were great films. Definitely would recommend those, and almost regret not having them on the list somewhere here, because they are definitely worth studying and looking into. They are masterfully done films.
You guys are going to get to hear me just dote nothing but love and affection on my problematic hero, Joseph von Sternberg, very soon. Sooner than you think.
Sooner than they think? Could that be next week?
It could be next week.
So we are watching The Blue Angel. This is a film that you can rent on Amazon for $1.99. But it is also a German film, so it is in the public domain.
Also the beginning of the illustrious career of Marlene Dietrich, one of the great Hollywood actresses and one of the earliest examples of celebrity within the talkie era. So we will have a lot to discuss.
So thank you again to Nathan Royal for our show's music. If you're enjoying A Century in Cinema, we'd love if you took a second to help support the show. And the easiest way to do that is just to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend us to someone else who likes movies or someone else who's looking for a new podcast. Thanks a lot to you, our listeners, and we'll have a new episode next week. I just want to give a shout out to all our Patreon members who keep the show running. Thank you all. You too can become a patron and get access to bonus episodes linked down in the show notes. You're listening on YouTube now, so like and subscribe and comment down below. Tell us if you've seen the film. What did you think of it? Did we miss anything? Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you for the next one.